Wilderness in the American Spirit's coming out a week from today, I believe, March 19th, which is very exciting. So the first question I wanted to ask is, I understand there's probably some research that took place when you were writing the book. So can you tell us a little bit more about that research process while writing Wilderness?
Yeah, the thing that I loved about this particular book is that it all stemmed from field work. So I found the Applegate Trail, and I found the story of the Applegate Trail as a matter of course in being out and about in Oregon country. So the first couple of years of what I would consider working on the book and investigating these stories was really a lot of great travel through Oregon country and a lot of boots on the ground, sort of walking and looking and learning the land. And then I overlaid the research for individual stories, all of which take place on the Applegate Trail. Sort of on top of that foundation of experience and boots on the ground observation.
And I also like piggybacking off of that question. I was wondering what drew you to this field of study. Like, what inspired you to write about geology and what brought you into this field?
I became a geologist really young and accidentally as an undergraduate. I was an environmental studies and general science major, and was really deeply influenced by a guest lecturer, a PhD student in the geology department in a class I was taking, who she sort of told her journey into being a researching scientist. And at the end of the lecture, she invited particularly, I mean, all of us, but particularly the young women in the class to come and talk to her about becoming a researcher. And I did. And she connected me with a fantastic female mentor who eventually handed me some really great projects, sort of with the caveat that I would change my major to geology. And it just opened up a whole new way of looking at the world to me. And gave me a deeper understanding of time and systems than I think my study of other natural sciences did. And I've been on that train ever since.
That sounds great, especially like the woman to woman experience, like you were able to um work with her and she was like trying to lift you up and like join this field. Like that sounds really great.
It was, and it was at a time when women were sorely underrepresented in earth sciences, and since then, um, that's turned around. And I think that it's true that there's actually more female and female identifying geology majors in the United States now than there are men, which I consider to be quite a triumph and a
Wow.
turnaround.
Yeah,
Yeah.
most definitely.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's amazing to hear. And going along with that, I know climate change and environmental issues, they are closely tied to geology. Sorry. So how do you address those themes in your writing, and what messages do you hope readers take away from your story?
Sure. Climate change and climate science really, didn't used to exist separate from the study of geology. The first climate scientists really were geologists, especially people studying water systems and glaciation. And so it's something that I was very familiar with, and have a strong foundation in. And I think that what's interesting about climate change is that it's a real unifier. Everyone's experiencing it. A lot of other environmental problems are really location specific, but climate change in particular is ubiquitous. And so one of the things that I tried really hard to do, even though Wilderness in the American Spirit is set in, sort of Oregon territory, and the stories are very specific to that place, what I was trying to do was to illuminate the ways in which everyone is impacted by environmental problems, and how the decisions that are made in one particular region about the environment and about resource use, extraction, and allocation over time in fact, build into these larger scale problems that then, the consequences of which are felt by everyone. And so my hope is that when people read Wilderness in the American Spirit, they come to understand that as white colonial, particularly mainstream American and colonial American, what we think of as the broader US population, that we have a shared history, that shared history is something that we are all implicit in, and it's something that we have all benefited from, but that we're also all reaping what we've sown from that. And then also the idea that we have a collective future as well as a collective past and a collective present, and that perhaps we all have an important role to play in how that collective future plays out.
Wow, that's really interesting. And I feel like especially in today's culture right now, especially the conversations that are going on about climate change, I think that's a very unique perspective on it that I haven't heard. So I really admire what you're trying to convey to your audience, for sure.
Thank you. Thanks for saying that. That's so nice of you.
Of course.
Yeah, I especially love the perspective that you have on it. It's very like open-minded, and you're trying to reach this broader audience as well, where we can all learn from it in ways where it's not just like pointing fingers as to who's to blame for climate change, but also breaking it down to its foundations as like we are all complicit. Like that's our unifying factor in it.
Well,
But
if you're in a sinking rowboat, it's not necessarily the best choice to stand and argue about whose fault the leak is.
Right. That's very true.
No, most
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very
Yeah.
unifying perspective, I think, which is
Yeah.
really important because it's not an issue that's going to be fixed by one person. It has to be something that everyone comes together to focus on.
Yeah. And I also think too that, I think we're 25 years basically into the 21st century. And I think that there's a lot of, especially young adults, that don't understand how we got to this age of consequence. And I think that without that context and that understanding of this is the road that we took to get here, I would imagine that it's very hard to envision a way forward. If you were born into these problems and you didn't watch them as they evolve. And so part of my hope is that people understand that, things, in geologic systems, in life systems, things happen catastrophically and they happen incrementally, and that both are equally important, and that problems unfold that way, but so do solutions.
And fieldwork plays a significant role in geology. Could you share any memorable experiences or challenges you encountered while like conducting field research for Wilderness and the American Spirit?
Yeah, so the Applegate Trail, I mean, it's a trail that exists. It was a wagon trail. And a lot of the trail has become like the interstate highway, or the old Highway 99 is what we call it, like the road systems. But there's also places where the trail still exists as wagon ruts, like through the landscape, and you can still go and see the actual wagon ruts. And there are people who have gone out and have marked the trail with, like, I want to say they're maybe 3-foot high posts with railroad ties used for markers. And they're in fields, and they're all over the place, and each one has like a little plaque on it with a quote from some immigrant that, about the place, from a diary or from a letter. And in the height of the lockdown portion of the pandemic, my husband and I set out with the best information, and they're not really mapped very well, but there's turn-by-turn directions to find all of these posts, and sort of went post to post during this, quiet time. There weren't a lot of people on the roads. and took pictures of all of these posts and sort of stood in those locations and traced it by foot. And it's really a remarkable thing to go, to use modern roads and modern maps and really great instructions to try and find this route and still be confused and still have a hard time and still not be able to find it. And you think, how did these people do this? How did the Applegates chart this? When you think about, it would have been forested. It would have been really hard to, they wouldn't have had the lines of sight that we had. But then also to think about the people coming west and, women and children and, families with all of their possessions in these wagons. And we think about, how hot it was for us to do that, and, how much gas we had to go through and how many hours it took. And you think about doing it on foot. It was really an extraordinary experience to go stand in those places and to be able to see the impact of all of those wagon wheels into the ground. It's something that if everybody has a chance to do it, then everybody should, because it's really a testament to tenacity.
Yeah, it sounds like the journey in itself was almost like a time capsule, where you're experiencing it like they would, except from your own perspective where you're not used to that. And I think that's so cool. That's
It was really
cool.
neat. Yeah, and it's the part of Oregon country where there's not a lot of development in some of these places. And so you see, you can stand at some of these places and you can look at the wagon ruts and you can turn around and see houses from the 1920s and houses from the 1950s. And then, modern, like a Tesla drives by on the nearest road. And it's just a really wild convergence of timelines that I really enjoyed.
I know we've already touched a little bit on your writing process, but I wanted to ask some more questions about it. So, you conducted this research and you have all these ideas. How do you take this research and all these ideas and organize them into your writing? Like, how did you put pen to paper with all of this?
It's a pretty chaotic process.
Yeah.
I'd,
Yeah, I can imagine.
I'd like to say that it wasn't, I had the Applegate Trail, and I had this concept of using it as a long form analogy, and I had a collection of stories, and I sort of took that and said, how do I write a book about the environment that doesn't feel like a book about the environment? And how do I write a book about the landscape that has science and has history and has some opinions in it, but that anyone would pick up and read for the stories alone? How do I make this go down easy? How do I stop writing to other environmental writers? And so that was when I became really, really kind of hooked on the idea of, this is a storytelling book, and these are trail stories. And as a geologist, as a field geologist, which is what I was, you spend a lot of time around the campfire and people tell their stories. And I thought, I wanted to feel like we're sitting around a campfire every night and we've made a little bit of progress and we're on a journey together. And so I wrote with that tone, and I think I wrote most of the stories first, and then was able to sort of go back through and write the other chapters that sort of support those stories and give some context and some history and some background to what was going on at the time that the story took place. And that was really helpful. And then the last thing I did was really try to make sure that there were themes that each chapter held. So, each chapter sort of deals with issues of the land, it deals with matters of the body, because the body is our primary environment, and each of the exposition chapters contains a map element, and that reflects what was going on at the time. And as a geologist, that made it much easier for me to sort of ground myself and not start to accidentally write a history of the United States, which this book is not,
Right.
and to really stay focused on what was important to move the our understanding of the relationship of Americans and the land forward. And that's really what this is a story about, is about how modern Americans came to have the relationship to the natural world that we have right now, which I argue is transactional and fear-based at this point.
Right. That's why I love writing so much. I think thinking about your audience and thinking about what you want to convey to them, I think that is, when you think about it with like the intention that you thought about it, I feel like that is what creates a story that does inspire or educate or empower. It's when you are thinking about it like that. And I think it's really great that you were thinking about, how do I convey this to just any reader, not just people that already have an understanding of geology or environmental science. I think that is such a great way to spread the stories you're wanting to spread and also the themes you're trying to convey. It's a very intentional way of thinking about your book. And I think that's really admirable. As a fellow writer, I really appreciate that.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really dedicated to the idea that people who think that they are diametrically opposed to me politically, will enjoy this book.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully we'll come to some agreement, considering we're all in the same rowboat.
Yeah, and then what are some pressing issues or misconceptions in geology that you aim to address through your writing, going off of what you said about like these things, some of these environmental issues being pushed by fear, or just like the overall aura and misconceptions that we have?
I would say that the primary misconception that I go after in this book is the American notion of infinity, and of abundance of the West in particular. And the West is a place of abundance, and we do have an illusion of infinity and expansiveness here. And I think that well into the 20th century, there was not really a need to consider scarcity in the United States, especially when it came to resources. But I think if you talk to anybody under the age of 30, they grew up in an era of scarcity and in an understanding of scarcity that other previous generations didn't have to face. And so I think, and in spite of that, I think that mass culture in America right now is still behaving as though those infinities exist, and is still behaving like those scarcities do not exist. And I think that we have to be particularly careful about that now as we come to greater understanding and acceptance of the inequalities that exist in our society, because as we approach scarcity, those inequalities will be magnified and intensified. And I think that will disproportionately impact people who have been historically disproportionately impacted. I think it will disproportionately benefit people who have historically benefited. And I think that the consequences of all of that will just be largely amplified. And so I think to give people a picture of the West that questions that expansiveness and that assumption of there will always be more trees, there will always be more clean water. I think that, it's, if you look at the American public as addicted to consumption, then you would say that, getting over your denial is the first step. And so we have to sort of recognize, we cannot go forward believing that we will never run out of whatever it is. So I think there's that. I also think that from a geologic perspective, I think geologists are able and willing to accept the idea that perhaps humanity has had a smaller impact on the life of the planet and the world than we would like to believe. And that there's a measure of humility as a species that we could adopt that would help us to be better global citizens.
Your aunt, that was awesome. I think that we could move on to some lighthearted questions now, veering into more about you. Taylor, if you want to go.
Right. So we always love asking this question to people that love books. If there's any fictional book that like you can think of, is there any book character that you would like to be and why?
The White Rabbit.
Okay. Why?
I love that you had that ready.
Without hesitation. Yeah, the White Rabbit.
Oh, that's so funny. Is there
Is
a reason why
reason
that's like
for
the
that?
first thing you thought of?
Because the White Rabbit's great. Because Alice in Wonderland is great. No, well, just yeah. I mean, I sort of relate to small, high energy, anxious rodentia, and as just a reflection of like my baseline state. I like the world that was created for Alice in Wonderland. I love its absurdities, and I like the way that the rabbit's a protagonist in those absurdities, you know? And so, yeah, that's where I would go.
I mean, honestly, that would be such a fun universe to live in, I think.
Right. You know, the Tweedles, you know, like,
As opposed to like the Watership Down rabbits where they're all in like peril and stuff.
Yeah.
That's
right,
where
you
my
know,
mind went.
it could go in a lot of different ways. Yeah. I mean, I just think, yeah, and not Alice, because I think she's, um, yeah, not Alice. I think
Yeah.
Yeah, no, for
she
sure.
lacks a certain level of agency in that story that the White Rabbit seems to have, you
Right.
know? Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much again for your time. This has
Oh,
Yes.
of
been
course.
really appreciated. But just
Yes.
for the last one, I would probably ask if you could describe your passion in one sentence pertaining to the books that you have written, what would it be?
I think that my entire body of work is really designed to get people to go outside, and even not just outside, but just participate in the physical world in addition to the digital world, for your own sake and for the sake of all of the rest of us. If we foster a relationship to the natural world, um, it's probably much to our benefit.
Right. And I definitely think that's an important sentiment right now. I think people have kind of lost touch with the natural world a bit since the digital world has kind of become so significant now. So I definitely think that's a great sentiment to convey to all generations, I think, too.
Mhm. Yeah, you know, our digital world is powered by fossil fuels,
Right.
so
Right. Yeah.
so it's not so separate from it anyway. Yeah,
Right.
but
Exactly.
there's good stuff out there beyond those walls and outside of those screens.
Yeah. Well, it's been wonderful talking to you, and we both appreciate your time, and we wish you all the success and congrats on your new book that comes out March 19th, next Tuesday.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. I wish you both, you know, great luck in all of your endeavors and whatever you do. Don't let anybody tell you that your stories aren't valid. Just assume that they're not your audience and move on. Somebody
Thank
needs to hear
you
what
so
you have to
much.
say.
I love that. Thank you. I needed
Love
to hear
hearing
that
that.
today. So,
No, me too. I'm like, oh, thank you so much. I
yeah.
will
Yeah,
definitely think about that.
for sure. And it's true. You know, somebody needs to hear your story. So if you run into somebody that doesn't need to hear it, just
They're
move
not your
on.
audience. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not your audience. Exactly.
Mhm.